The whistle of the Northern Pacific train cut through the crisp Montana air as it slowed into Silver Creek Station. Eleanor Wilson clutched her well-worn leather satchel, her knuckles white beneath her faded gloves. The year was 1885, and at 48 years old, Ellie, to the few who truly knew her, was taking the greatest risk of her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She smoothed down her best navy dress, the one with the modest lace collar that had seen too many careful mendings. A few strands of auburn hair, more silver than copper now, had escaped her tight bun despite her efforts to appear presentable after 3 days of travel. She'd spent her life savings on this journey west, answering an advertisement from a man named Frederick Mason, a successful cattle rancher seeking a respectable woman of good character to share in the bounty of Montana Territory's richest valley. His letters had been so kind, so full of promise. "Age is but a number," he'd written, "when a heart is genuine and hands are willing." Ellie had read those words 100 times during the journey, tracing her fingers over the firm, confident handwriting. "Silver Creek Station," the conductor called, and Ellie took a deep breath, gathering her courage along with her modest belongings. The platform was sparse, a handful of townspeople awaiting packages, 2 cowboys leaning against a post sharing a smoke, and a tall man in an expensive coat standing apart from the others. Frederick Mason. She recognized him from the small photograph he'd sent, though in person he cut an even more impressive figure, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with a hat that cost more than everything Ellie owned. Their eyes met across the platform. For one breathless moment, hope fluttered in her chest. Then it died as his expression shifted from anticipation to disappointment, his smile faltering as he took in her appearance. Still, Ellie approached him with dignity, her chin lifted despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. "Mr. Mason, I'm Eleanor Wilson." Frederick removed his hat, a gesture of politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Wilson, I must say your letters didn't indicate..." "Didn't indicate what, Mr. Mason?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. He glanced around, lowering his voice. "Forgive my directness, but you appear considerably older than I anticipated." The words stung like a physical blow. "I never misrepresented my age, sir. No, perhaps not explicitly." His gaze drifted past her to the train, as if hoping a younger woman might still disembark. "But I had hoped for someone with more years ahead than behind." Ellie stood perfectly still, the weight of his rejection pressing down on her shoulders. Around them, the cowboys had fallen silent, watching the uncomfortable scene unfold. "I see," she said, her voice steady despite the humiliation burning her cheeks. "And what do you suggest I do now, Mr. Mason? I've traveled over 1,000 miles. At your invitation." Frederick sighed, reaching into his vest pocket. "I'll provide for your return journey, of course. I'm not without compassion, Miss Wilson. But I require a wife who can give me children, you understand? Someone." He hesitated, less plain. The word hung in the air between them. Plain. After a lifetime of hearing it whispered behind her back, Ellie had thought herself immune to its sting. She was wrong. "I sold everything I owned to come here," she said quietly. Frederick pressed money into her hand. "The eastbound train comes through tomorrow morning. Mrs. Hayes at the general store lets rooms upstairs. Tell her I sent you." He replaced his hat, already stepping away. "Good day, Miss Wilson. I wish you well." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Ellie alone on the platform, a stranger in a strange land with nothing but a satchel and the cruel weight of rejection. One of the cowboys snickered. "Looks like old Mason's mail-order bride didn't match the catalog picture." Ellie squared her shoulders and walked away from the station, her steps measured and deliberate despite the tears threatening to spill. Silver Creek's main street stretched before her. A church, a saloon, a general store with peeling paint, and a handful of other weathered buildings. The October wind whipped around her, carrying the scent of pine and coming snow. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. For the first time since her parents' passing 10 years ago, Ellie felt truly alone. The bell above the door of Silver Creek General Store jangled as Ellie entered. The warmth inside was a small mercy after the biting wind, but it did little to thaw the chill that had settled in her bones since Frederick Mason's rejection. A stout woman with kind eyes looked up from behind the counter. "Can I help you, miss?" "Mrs. Hayes?" Ellie asked. When the woman nodded, she continued, "Frederick Mason said you might have a room available." Understanding dawned in Mrs. Hayes's expression. "You'd be the bride he sent for, then?" Ellie's smile was brittle. "Apparently not." Martha Hayes clucked her tongue, coming around the counter. "That man, always wanting what he can't have and never appreciating what's in front of him." She patted Ellie's arm. "I've got a room. It's small, but clean." "I can only stay one night," Ellie said, showing the money Frederick had given her. "I'll be taking the eastbound train tomorrow." "Back home already? Where's home for you?" "Pennsylvania, though there's little left for me there now." Ellie glanced around the store, taking in the shelves of practical goods. "I was a school teacher, taught for 25 years before the school board decided they wanted someone younger." Martha's eyes softened with sympathy. "They're fools, same as Frederick Mason." Outside, the sky darkened as clouds gathered over the mountains. Martha peered through the window. "Storm's coming in early. The passes might close if it's as bad as it looks." She turned back to Ellie. "Let me show you to that room. You must be exhausted." The room was indeed small. A narrow bed, a wash basin, a chair by the window overlooking the street. Ellie set down her satchel and thanked Martha, who hesitated at the door. "Supper's at 6 if you'd care to join me," the shopkeeper offered. Ellie nodded gratefully, and Martha left her alone. Only then did Ellie allow herself to sink onto the bed, removed her gloves, and finally let the tears come. She cried silently, as she'd learned to do through life's disappointments. The death of her parents, the loss of her position, and now this final humiliation. When she had no tears left, she washed her face in the basin, the cold water reviving her somewhat. From her satchel, she withdrew her most precious possession, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry. The book fell open to a well-worn page, as if sensing her need for comfort. The best portion of a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and love, she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper. A crash of thunder shook the window, startling her. The storm had arrived with sudden fury, rain lashing against the glass. Down in the street, people hurried for shelter. Through the curtain of rain, Ellie spotted a man struggling against the wind. Unlike the others rushing for doorways, he moved with halting uncertainty, one hand extended before him, the other gripping a walking stick. A large dog trotted beside him, occasionally pressing against his leg as if guiding him. The man was blind. As she watched, a powerful gust knocked him sideways. He stumbled, lost his balance, and fell hard onto the muddy street. His dog barked frantically, circling him as he attempted to rise. Without thinking, Ellie rushed from her room, down the stairs, and out into the storm. The rain soaked her instantly as she crossed to the fallen stranger. "Sir, let me help you," she called over the howling wind, kneeling beside him in the mud. The man turned toward her voice, a handsome face despite the days-old beard, with unseeing grey eyes that somehow still conveyed intelligence and dignity. "Much obliged," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. Ellie helped him to his feet, noting his sturdy build and the strength in his arm as she steadied him. "You're hurt," she observed, seeing blood on his palm where he'd broken his fall. "It's nothing," he insisted, retrieving his walking stick from the mud. "Scout and I have weathered worse." The dog, Scout, shook himself, spraying water in all directions. Despite everything, Ellie found herself laughing. "You have a beautiful laugh," the man said, his face turned toward the sound. "I'm Gabriel. Sullivan, most folks call me Gabe. Eleanor Wilson, Ellie." Another crack of thunder split the sky. "We should get inside," Ellie said, still holding his arm. "The general store is just a few steps away." "Actually, I was headed to the Rusty." "Nailed to wait out the storm," Gabe replied. "Would you join me for a hot coffee, Miss Wilson? Least I can do to thank you." Ellie hesitated only briefly. What did propriety matter now? She had already lost everything else. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Sullivan." The Rusty Nail Saloon wasn't as disreputable as Ellie had feared. At this hour, it housed only a handful of patrons, a card game in the corner, an old-timer dozing by the pot-bellied stove, and the bartender polishing glasses. All eyes turned as Ellie entered with Gabe, the dog Scout, trailing behind them. "Sullivan," the bartender called out, "thought you weren't coming back to town till next week." "Storm's early, Joe. Needed supplies." Gabe navigated confidently toward the bar, guided by Scout and Ellie's light touch at his elbow. "2 coffees, please, and whatever this kind lady would like to eat." "Oh, I couldn't," Ellie began. "I insist," Gabe said. "You saved me from a face full of mud out there." They settled at a table near the stove, the warmth slowly chasing away the chill. Scout curled at Gabe's feet, his wet fur steaming slightly in the heat. "You're new to Silver Creek," Gabe observed as Joe brought their coffee. It wasn't a question. "Is it that obvious?" Ellie wrapped her cold fingers around the warm cup. "Small town, new voice." He smiled slightly. "I would have remembered yours." Ellie found herself studying him, the way his hands moved with surprising grace, how he tilted his head slightly when listening. There was no pity in her observation, only curiosity. "May I ask," she began, "how long I've been blind?" He finished for her. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 5 years now, mining accident up in the hills. Blast went wrong." "I'm sorry." Gabe shrugged. "Don't be. I'm alive, which is more than some can say who were with me that day." He sipped his coffee. "Now, what brings a Pennsylvania schoolteacher to Silver Creek, Montana?" Ellie nearly spilled her coffee. "How did you know I was a teacher from Pennsylvania?" His smile widened, transforming his face. "Your accent, slight as it is, and you have a teacher's way of speaking. Precise, thoughtful. As for Pennsylvania, that was a guess. Eastern, certainly. You're quite perceptive, Mr. Sullivan. When you lose one sense, the others compensate." He leaned forward slightly. "You haven't answered my question, though." Ellie hesitated, embarrassment flooding back. But something about Gabe's direct manner encouraged honesty. "I came to marry a man I'd never met," she admitted. "Frederick Mason. We corresponded for months, and he invited me here to be his wife." Gabe's expression darkened. "Mason. I know the name. You don't sound fond of him." "Let's just say Frederick Mason is a man who values appearances above substance." Gabe's fingers tapped lightly on the table. "I take it the meeting didn't go well?" Ellie stared into her coffee. "He found me too old, too plain." The words hung between them, Ellie immediately regretting her candor. What was she doing, confessing her humiliation to a stranger? But Gabe didn't offer empty platitudes or uncomfortable silence. Instead, he reached across the table with unerring accuracy and covered her hand with his own. "Frederick Mason is a fool," he said simply. Something warm unfurled in Ellie's chest. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps the seed of it. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, beside the stove with this strange, perceptive man, she felt the first hint of shelter, She'd known all day. "The eastbound train comes tomorrow," she said quietly. Gabe's hand withdrew from hers. "And is that where you want to be? Heading east?" The question caught her off guard. Since the moment on the platform, she'd assumed there was no choice. But to return, defeated, to a place that no longer wanted her either. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have nothing waiting for me there." "And nothing holding you here," Gabe observed. "No." The conversation paused as Joe brought plates of stew and warm bread. The food was simple but hearty, and Ellie suddenly realized how hungry she was. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Gabe spoke again. "I live about 3 miles out of town, Whispering Pine Ranch. It's modest, 30 head, of cattle, some chickens, a vegetable garden that's seen better days." Ellie wasn't sure why he was telling her this. "The thing is," he continued, breaking a piece of bread with deft fingers, "I manage well enough with Scout's help, but there are tasks that still give me trouble. Reading correspondence, sorting supplies, mending, the finer details." Understanding dawned slowly. "Mr. Sullivan, are you offering me employment?" "I'm offering you a choice, Miss Wilson, the eastbound train, or a position as my housekeeper and assistant." He named a monthly wage that, while not extravagant, would allow her to save something for the future. Room and board included, of course. Ellie studied him, trying to discern his motivation. Was this charity, pity for the rejected bride, or something else entirely? "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked. Gabe's unseeing eyes seemed to look right through her. "Because in my experience, Miss Wilson, the people this town is quickest to dismiss often have the most to offer." His smile returned, wry now. "Besides, you have a kind voice. I trust kind voices." Before Ellie could respond, the saloon door banged open. A man stood silhouetted against the stormy afternoon, water dripping from his long coat. Even at a distance, something about him made Ellie uneasy. "Well, well," the newcomer drawled, shaking water from his hat. "Gabriel Sullivan, as I live and breathe. Didn't expect to find you in town today." Gabe stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Silas Blackwood. What brings you back to Silver Creek?" The man, Silas, sauntered toward their table, his eyes lingering unpleasantly on Ellie. "Business opportunities. This valley's changing, Sullivan. No place for small operations like yours anymore." He pulled up a chair uninvited and straddled it. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your lovely companion?" Something protective stirred in Ellie. "Eleanor Wilson," she said before Gabe could speak, her teacher's voice firmly in place. "And I believe we were in the middle of a business discussion, Mr. Blackwood." Silas raised an eyebrow, amused rather than offended. "Business? With a blind rancher?" He leaned closer to Ellie, lowering, his voice as if sharing a confidence. "You should know Sullivan here is barely hanging on to that piece of land. Mason's been trying to buy him out for months." "That'll do, Blackwood," Gabe said quietly, but with an edge that made Scout lift his head alertly. Silas stood, raising his hands in mock surrender, just making friendly conversation. He tipped his hat to Ellie. "Ma'am, when you're ready for a better offer, you can find me right here." He sauntered to the bar, but Ellie could feel his eyes on them still. The comfortable atmosphere had shattered. Gabe's face was tight, his hands no longer relaxed around his coffee cup. "An old acquaintance?" Ellie asked carefully. "From the mining days," Gabe replied. "He was there when—" He trailed off, then shook his head as if clearing unwanted thoughts. "Silas Blackwood works for whoever pays him best. Currently, that's Frederick Mason." "I see." And she did see how the threads of this small community were already weaving around her, how quickly she'd stumbled into currents she didn't understand. "I should apologize," Gabe said. "My offer has complications I didn't mention. Mason wants my land, and he's not particular about how he gets it. working for me might make you unpopular in certain circles. Ellie thought of Frederick Mason's dismissive eyes, of the life she'd left behind, where she'd grown invisible with age, of the eastbound train and the uncertainty beyond. Then she looked at Gabriel Sullivan, a man who saw more without eyes than many did with them. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, straightening her shoulders, "I stopped caring about popularity around the same time I stopped believing in fairy tales. Your offer stands." For the first time, Gabe laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to chase away the shadow Silas Blackwood had cast. "It stands, Miss Wilson. Then I accept." Outside, the storm continued its assault on Silver Creek, but inside, Ellie felt something shift, the first fragile foundation of a new beginning taking shape beneath her feet. The rain had eased to a gentle patter by the time they left the rusty nail. The streets of Silver Creek had transformed into rivers of mud, but Ellie hardly noticed as she walked beside Gabe, Scout, trotting ahead of them. "I should collect my things from Mrs. Hayes," she said, suddenly remembering her satchel upstairs at the general store. Gabe nodded. "I'll wait here with Scout." Martha Hayes looked up from her ledger as Ellie entered, raising an eyebrow at her mud-splattered dress. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd washed away in that downpour," she remarked. "I've found employment," Ellie announced, surprised at the note of pride in her voice. "With Mr. Sullivan at Whispering Pine Ranch." Martha's expression shifted, from surprise to concern. "Gabe Sullivan, the blind rancher." She lowered her voice. "Are you certain that's wise, dear? A woman alone out at that isolated place?" "Mr. Sullivan has been nothing but respectful," Ellie replied firmly, "and I'm hardly some naive girl to be taken advantage of." Martha studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "No, I don't suppose you are. Gabe's a good man, despite what some in this town might say." She hesitated. "Just be careful. Frederick Mason doesn't take kindly to being thwarted, and he's had his eye on Sullivan's water rights for years." "I'll remember that," Ellie said, gathering her satchel. "Thank you for your kindness, Mrs. Hayes." Outside, she found Gabe in conversation with a young man loading supplies into a wagon. Scout sat alertly at his master's feet, occasionally nudging Gabe's hand with his nose. "Ah, Miss Wilson," Gabe said, turning at the sound of her approach. With remarkable accuracy. "This is Ethan, who works for me part-time. He'll drive us to the ranch." The journey to Whispering Pine took nearly an hour along muddy roads that wound through rolling foothills. As they traveled, the landscape opened before Ellie, vast and wild. Nothing like the ordered Pennsylvania countryside she'd known all her life. Towering pines lined the road, and distant mountains rose against the clearing sky, their peaks dusted with the season's first snow. "It's beautiful," she murmured, almost to herself. Beside her on the wagon seat, Gabe smiled. "Tell me what you see." And so she did, describing the golden afternoon light on the wet meadows, the way the pines swayed in the wind, the hawk circling above a distant ridge. Gabe listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed how deeply he remembered the visual world despite his years of blindness. "There it is," Ethan announced as they crested a small rise, Whispering Pine. The ranch came into view. Modest indeed, as Gabe had said, but with a certain sturdy charm. The main house was a two-story structure built of weathered logs with a covered porch wrapping around the front. A barn stood nearby, along with several smaller outbuildings. Cattle grazed in a meadow below, and between the house and the road, a stream cut through the property, swollen now with rainwater. As if sensing her scrutiny, Gabe said, "My father built this place when the territory was still young. He named it for the sound the wind makes through those big pines behind the house." He paused. "I can still hear it even now. Some things don't change." There was something in his voice. Not self-pity, but a simple acknowledgement of loss that touched. Ellie deeply. This man had built a life around what remained rather than dwelling on what was gone. It resonated with her own determination to forge ahead despite her disappointments. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop before the house. Scout leaped down, racing ahead to the porch as if announcing their arrival. Gabe climbed down with practiced ease, then turned to offer Ellie his hand. "Welcome to Whispering Pine, Miss Wilson." The gesture struck her. This blind man helping her down, his hand steady and sure. She took it, feeling the strength and calluses that spoke of a life of hard work. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." Inside, the house was simply furnished, but clean and orderly. A central room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace along one wall. Stairs led to what Ellie presumed were bedrooms above. "Ethan, would you show Miss Wilson to the spare room?" Gabe asked. "I believe my mother left some dresses in the trunk there. They might need altering, but they'd be better than traveling clothes while you settle in." "Of course," the young man replied, carrying Ellie's satchel upstairs. Left alone with Gabe, Ellie felt a momentary awkwardness. This morning she had expected to be meeting her future husband. Now she was standing in the home of a man she barely knew, having agreed to work for him with nothing but instinct to guide her decision. "Mr. Sullivan," she began, "I should be clear about my skills. I can cook, clean, read correspondence for you. I'm handy with the needle and thread, but I know little of ranching." Gabe hung his coat by the door, moving through his space with the ease of long familiarity. "I don't expect you to rope cattle, Miss Wilson, though I'd be happy to teach you, should you wish to learn." The idea of this blind man teaching her to rope cattle startled a laugh from her. "You can do that? There's precious little I can't do, with the right adaptations." He moved to the stove, feeling for the coffee pot with sure hands. "The only tasks that truly give me trouble are those requiring reading or fine detail work." He paused. "And perhaps a bit of human company wouldn't be amiss. The winters are long here." His candor disarmed her. There was no pretense in Gabriel Sullivan, no hidden agenda she could discern. Just a straightforward man making the best of his circumstances, as she herself was trying to do. "I understand loneliness, Mr. Sullivan." He turned toward her voice, his expression softening. "I believe you do, Miss Wilson." He gestured toward the stairs. "Rest now. Tomorrow will be soon enough to begin our arrangement in earnest." The spare room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the stream and mountains beyond. Ethan had lit the lamp and brought hot water for washing before discreetly withdrawing. Alone at last, Ellie sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day washing over her in a wave of exhaustion. This morning, she had stepped off the train with such hope, such carefully guarded dreams. Frederick Mason's rejection had seemed the end of everything. Yet here she was, miles from town in the home of a blind rancher who had offered her not marriage, but something perhaps more valuable, respect and purpose. From the trunk at the foot of the bed, she withdrew a simple dress of faded blue cotton. It would need taking in at the waist, but the length was good. She laid it out for tomorrow, then changed into her nightdress and slipped beneath the quilt. Outside her window, the wind sighed through the pines, a whispered lullaby in the gathering darkness. For the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, Ellie fell asleep without fear of what tomorrow might bring. In the grey light before dawn, she woke to the sound of movement below. Dressing quickly in the blue dress she'd found, Ellie pinned her hair into its usual severe bun and made her way downstairs. She found Gabe already at the stove, coffee brewing and bacon sizzling in a cast-iron pan. Scout lay nearby, head on. Paws but eyes tracking her movement alertly. "Good morning," Gabe said without turning. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Ellie moved to his side. "Please, let me finish that. It's why I'm here after all." He stepped aside with a smile. "By all means, though you should know I've been cooking for myself for 5 years. Blindness makes tasks harder, not impossible. "I'll remember that," she said, taking the spatula from him. "Though I notice you didn't mention how many times you've burned the bacon in those 5 years." Gabe laughed, a sound she was coming to enjoy. "Fair point, Miss Wilson, fair point." As they ate breakfast, Gabe outlined the daily rhythm of the ranch. Ethan came 3 days a week to help with the heavier work, and a local boy named Tommy tended the cattle most days. The garden had fallen into disrepair after the last housekeeper left 2 months ago. "She was a widow from town," Gabe explained. "Nice enough woman, but she couldn't stand the isolation. Most can't." Ellie thought of the school where she'd taught for 25 years, the students she'd loved, the community that had eventually deemed her too old to be of value. "Isolation comes in many forms, Mr. Sullivan," she said quietly. "Sometimes one can be most alone in a crowd." He nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. "Indeed." After breakfast, Gabe showed her around the property, the barn where 2 horses nickered softly in their stalls, the chicken coop where a dozen hens scratched for feed, the workshop where he crafted simple wooden items by feel. "This is remarkable," Ellie said, running her fingers over a smooth butter paddle he'd made. "I don't think I could do this with my eyes open." "Practice," he said with a shrug, but she caught the hint of pride in his voice. "And necessity. A man needs purpose, sight or no." By midday, Ellie had begun to settle into the rhythm of whispering. Pine. She'd found the pantry well-stocked but disorganized, the linens clean but haphazardly folded, the garden still yielding late squash and potatoes despite its neglect. Everywhere she looked, she saw small ways she could be useful, could bring order and comfort to this place. It was while she was hanging laundry to dry that she spotted the rider approaching from the direction of town. The sun glinted off his fair hair as he guided his horse up the path to the house. Frederick Mason, Ellie's hands stilled on the damp sheet she'd been hanging. She smoothed her apron, a gesture born of nerves rather than vanity, and walked around to the front of the house as the rider dismounted. Frederick removed his hat when he saw her, surprise evident on his handsome face. "Miss Wilson, I didn't expect to find you here." "And Mr. Mason," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "I've taken a position with Mr. Sullivan." He frowned, glancing toward the house. "Has Sullivan returned from town then?" "I'm right here, Mason." Gabe's voice came from the porch, where he stood with Scout at his side. The dog's ears were alert, a low growl rumbling in his chest until Gabe quieted him with a touch. "What brings you to Whispering Pine? More offers I'm not interested in hearing?" Frederick's expression hardened. "Business, Sullivan. The same as always." His gaze shifted between Ellie and Gabe, calculation evident in his eyes. "Though I must say you work quickly. The lady only arrived in Silver Creek yesterday." Ellie felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment this time, but from anger at his insinuation. "Mr. Sullivan has engaged me as his housekeeper, Mr. Mason, a position I was fortunate to find after you left me stranded at the station." Frederick had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Yes, well, about that. I may have been hasty in my judgment, Miss Wilson." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "In fact, I've come to offer you an alternative. I have a position at my ranch as well, companion to my elderly mother. The pay would be better than whatever Sullivan's offering, I assure you." The sudden reversal left Ellie momentarily speechless. Was this the same man who had dismissed her so cruelly just yesterday? "How generous," she finally managed. "But I've already accepted Mr. Sullivan's offer." Frederick's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Consider it, at least. A woman of your maturity might be more comfortable in a household with another lady present." "Miss Wilson has made her choice, Mason," Gabe said, his voice tight. "And you're trespassing on private property." Frederick's smile vanished. "Still stubborn as ever, I see." He turned back to Ellie. When you tire of playing nursemaid to a blind man, my offer stands." He mounted his horse in one fluid motion. "Sullivan, you have 1 month to consider my latest offer before I take other measures." "Is that a threat?" Gabe asked calmly. "A business reality," Frederick replied. "This valley is changing. Small ranchers can't survive what's coming." With that, he wheeled his horse around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. Ellie stood watching until he disappeared from sight, conflicting emotions churning within her. The nerve of the man to reject her so completely one day and then try to lure her away the next. "Are you all right?" Gabe asked as she approached the porch. "I'm fine," she assured him, "just perplexed. Why would he suddenly want to hire me after finding me so unsuitable yesterday?" Gabe's expression was grim. "Because you're here with me. Frederick Mason doesn't like being outdone, even in something he didn't want." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I should have warned you. Mason's been trying to buy this land for over a year now." "Why? Your ranch is lovely, but surely his is much larger." "It's not the ranch he wants, it's the water rights." Gabe gestured toward the stream. "That creek never runs dry, even in the worst drought years. It feeds from an underground spring up in those hills. Mason wants to divert it to irrigate the southern valley where his new cattle operation is expanding." Understanding dawned. "And without that water, your ranch couldn't survive." Precisely. Ellie thought of Frederick's parting words about taking other measures if Gabe didn't sell. A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the autumn air. What did he mean about small ranchers not surviving what's coming? Gabe's face grew somber. "The big cattle operations are moving in. Men like Mason have investors from back east. They're buying up land, fencing off open range, changing the way things have been done here for generations." He shook his head. "But that's not your concern, Miss Wilson. You're here to keep house, not worry about water rights and cattle. Barons." But as Ellie returned to her laundry, she couldn't help but feel that it had become her concern. In just one day, she had begun to care about Whispering Pine, about its quiet dignity and the man who refused to be defined by his limitations. Frederick Mason had rejected her for being too plain, too old, then tried to hire her when it suited his purposes. Gabriel Sullivan, who couldn't see her face at all, had offered her respect and purpose from the first moment they met. The choice between them wasn't really a choice at all. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the yard, Ellie made a silent promise to herself. She would make herself indispensable here at Whispering Pine. The first week at Whispering Pine settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Each morning, Ellie rose before dawn to kindle the fire and prepare breakfast before Gabe came downstairs. They would eat together in the kitchen, planning the day ahead while Scout curled at their feet. Then Gabe would head out with Tommy, the young cattle hand, while Ellie tackled the house and garden. What struck her most was the quiet dignity with which Gabe approached his blindness. He never complained, never sought pity. Instead, he had adapted his entire world, from the carefully organized tools in his workshop to the small notches he'd carved in the stair railings to mark the top and bottom steps. On the 5th day, while sorting through a stack of correspondence that had accumulated over the past month, Ellie discovered several bank notices. "Mr. Sullivan!" she called, finding him in the workshop where he was sanding a new chair leg, his fingers testing the smoothness with remarkable sensitivity. "There are some letters here you should know about." She read them aloud, formal language masking a serious situation. The mortgage on Whispering Pine was 3 months in arrears. The Silver Creek Bank, recently purchased by Eastern investors, was threatening foreclosure if payment wasn't received within 30 days. Gabe's face remained impassive, but his hands stilled on the wood. "I was afraid of that." "You knew?" Ellie asked, surprised. "I suspected, without someone to read." "My mail, I've been guessing at the amounts due." He set down his tools. "The cattle prices dropped last season. I had to choose between paying hands to help with the ranch or making full mortgage payments. And you chose the ranch." He nodded. "A working ranch has a chance. An abandoned one is just land waiting to be claimed." Ellie studied the notices. Again, the bank president. It's signed by a Mr. Blackwood. "Silas," Gabe confirmed grimly. "Mason's man." The pieces fell into place with dismaying clarity. "So that's what Frederick meant about small ranchers not surviving. They're squeezing you financially." "It's an old strategy," Gabe said, picking up his sanding block again, "but an effective one. What will you do?" His hands resumed their steady rhythm on the wood. "What I've always done. Adapt. Survive." His unseeing eyes turned toward her. "I don't suppose you have experience with bookkeeping, Miss Wilson." Ellie smiled, despite the gravity of the situation. 25 years, managing a school budget on pennies, Mr. Sullivan. I believe I can help." That evening, they sat at the kitchen table with account books spread before them. Ellie read aloud the entries from the past year: expenses, income, debts owed and paid. By lamplight, they constructed a clearer picture of Whispering Pine's financial state. It wasn't good, but neither was it hopeless. "The cattle drive next month will help," Gabe said, calculating figures in his head with impressive accuracy. "And I've been saving the best of my woodwork to sell at the Harvest Festival." "Could you sell more?" Ellie asked, picking up a smooth wooden bowl from the shelf. "These are beautiful pieces." "With the right market, perhaps. But Silver Creek is a small town, and not everyone is eager to buy from." He trailed off. "From a blind man." Ellie finished gently. Gabe's smile was wry. "From someone in Mason's bad graces, more like. But yes, that too." Ellie thought for a moment. "What about Helena or Bozeman? Surely there are merchants in the larger towns who would appreciate quality craftsmanship." "Possibly, but I'd need someone to make those connections, negotiate fair prices." "I could do that," Ellie offered. When Gabe looked surprised, she added, "I've been negotiating with stingy school boards and difficult parents for decades, Mr. Sullivan. A few merchants wouldn't intimidate me." For the first time, Gabe reached across the table and found her hand, covering it with his own. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I believe you could handle them quite effectively, Miss Wilson." His voice held a note of admiration that made her cheeks flush. "Thank you." Later, after Gabe had retired to his room, Ellie sat alone by the dying fire. Her fingers absently traced the edge of the wooden bowl, feeling the smoothness that spoke of patient craftsmanship. 1 week ago, she had been on a train bound for a new life as Frederick Mason's wife. Now she sat in a humble ranch house, helping a blind rancher fight to keep his land against ruthless financial tactics. And somehow, despite everything, she felt more alive than she had in years. The following morning brought the first frost, coating the grass with delicate white crystals that crunched beneath Ellie's boots as she made her way to the chicken coop. Her breath formed small clouds in the chill air as she gathered eggs, listening to the distant lowing of cattle from the lower meadow. She was halfway back to the house when she spotted riders approaching, 3 men moving with purpose toward Whispering Pine. Scout began barking from the porch, the sound bringing Gabe to the door, his face alert to the disruption in the morning's peace. "Who is it?" he called to Ellie. 3 riders, she replied, hurrying toward him. "One looks like Silas Blackwood. I don't recognize the others." Gabe's expression hardened. "Best get inside, Miss Wilson." "I'll do no such thing," she said firmly, setting down her basket of eggs. "This is as much my concern as yours now." A flicker of something, surprise, respect, perhaps both, crossed Gabe's face. He didn't argue further, instead reaching for his walking stick propped by the door. The riders halted in the yard, Silas Blackwood in the lead with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, two hard-faced men watched the house with flat, evaluating stares. "Sullivan," Silas called, dismounting. "Lovely morning for a visit, wouldn't you say?" "State your business, Blackwood," Gabe replied, Scout pressing close against his leg. "Just a friendly reminder about your mortgage payments." Silas's gaze shifted to Ellie, his smile widening unpleasantly. "Miss Wilson, settling in, I see. Mason's mighty disappointed you turned down his generous offer." "I'm quite content where I am, Mr. Blackwood. For now, perhaps." He returned his attention to Gabe. "The bank's running out of patience, Sullivan. 30 days, as the notice states, though I'm sure I could persuade the directors to extend the deadline if you'd reconsider Mason's offer for the water rights." "The water rights aren't for sale," Gabe said evenly, "and I'll make the payment." Silas sighed dramatically. "Always the hard way with you." He gestured to the men behind him. "These gentlemen work for the bank now. They'll be making regular visits to assess the property's condition, standard procedure for assets at risk of foreclosure." "Intimidation, you mean?" Ellie said sharply. Silas raised an eyebrow. My, you found yourself a spirited defender, Sullivan." He tipped his hat. "We'll be seeing you soon." As they turned to leave, he called over his shoulder, "By the way, I heard wolves took down one of Mason's calves last night. Might want to keep your stock close to home." After they'd ridden away, Ellie turned to Gabe. "There aren't any wolves around here, are there?" "Not the four-legged kind," Gabe replied grimly. "That was a threat, plain and simple." The rest of the day passed in tense productivity. Gabe called Tommy in early from the lower pasture and, together, they moved the cattle closer to the ranch house. Ellie watched from the garden as they worked, marveling at how Gabe navigated the familiar terrain on horseback, relying on sound and memory where sight failed him. That evening, as she prepared supper, a knock at the door startled them both. Scout growled low in his throat until Gabe quieted him with a word. "Who's there?" Gabe called, reaching for the rifle kept by the door. "Martha Hayes," came the reply. "And a wagon full of supplies you ordered, Sullivan." Ellie opened the door to find the shopkeeper standing on the porch, looking windblown but determined. "Mrs. Hayes, what a surprise." Martha bustled in, carrying a large basket. "I heard Blackwood and his thugs paid you a visit this morning. News travels fast in Silver Creek." She set the basket on the table. "Thought you might appreciate some fresh bread and preserves. The rest is in the wagon. Feed, flour, coffee, the supplies Gabe ordered last week." "That's very kind," Ellie said, touched by the unexpected support. "But how did you know about Blackwood?" Martha snorted. "Tommy's mother works in my store. That boy couldn't wait to tell her about Miss Wilson standing up to the big bad banker." She glanced approvingly at Ellie. "Said you had more spine than most men in the territory." Gabe chuckled. He wasn't wrong. Together, they unloaded the wagon, storing supplies in the pantry and barn. As they worked, Martha filled them in on the town gossip. Most importantly, that Frederick Mason was hosting a meeting of cattle barons from Helena next week. "They're planning something," she said, lowering her voice though no one could possibly overhear them. "Talk of new fencing laws, water rights legislation. Mason's got the territorial judge in his pocket and half the town council besides." "And the other half?" Gabe asked. Martha smiled grimly. "Not everyone's forgotten how this valley was built, by small ranchers helping each other, not Eastern money and barbed wire." She glanced at the darkening sky. "I should get back before night falls completely. Just wanted you to know you're not alone out here." After she'd gone, Ellie found Gabe standing on the porch, his face turned toward the mountains now invisible. In the gathering darkness, "I'm sorry to have brought you into this fight," he said quietly. "It wasn't what you signed on for." Ellie moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him against the evening chill. On the contrary, Mr. Sullivan, I believe it's exactly what I needed. He turned toward her, unseeing eyes somehow finding her face with uncanny accuracy. How so? All my life, I've done what was expected. Taught children who weren't mine. Lived quietly, aged invisibly. She took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. But here now I feel necessary. Part of something worth fighting for. Gabe was silent for a long moment. Then, with gentle precision, his hand found hers where it rested on the porch railing. "You are necessary, Ellie," he said, using her given name for the first time. The sound of it in his deep voice made something flutter in her chest. "More than you know." They stood together in companionable silence as the first stars appeared above the pines, their hands barely touching yet somehow anchoring each other against the coming storm. The days that followed fell into a new pattern, one shaped by both routine and vigilance. Tommy brought word that 2 of Mason's men had been seen riding the boundaries of Whispering Pine, watching the cattle. Twice, Ellie spotted riders on the ridge above the ranch, observing before melting back into the trees. Yet amidst the tension, something else was growing, a partnership between Ellie and Gabe that transcended their initial arrangement. She found herself lingering in the workshop after reading his correspondence, watching his hands transform raw wood into objects of simple beauty. He sought her opinion on ranch matters, valuing her practical intelligence and clear thinking. And in the evenings, they talked, really talked, in a way Ellie had never experienced with anyone before. Gabe told her of his childhood at Whispering Pine, of learning the land by heart before losing his sight, of the mining accident that had taken not only his vision, but the lives of 3 friends. Ellie shared stories of her teaching days, of the children she'd guided, of her own lost dreams of family as the years passed and she remained unmarried. "I never thought I'd find someone who saw beyond," she admitted one night as they sat by the fire. "Beyond the plainness." "What? Plainness?" Gabe asked, genuine confusion in his voice. "You know what I mean," she said gently. "I'm not a beautiful woman. I never was, even in youth." Gabe shook his head. "Beauty is a strange concept for me now. I remember colors, shapes, what society deemed attractive, but those memories fade a little more each year." He leaned forward in his chair. "Now beauty is in a voice that doesn't hold pity when speaking to me, in hands that work without complaint, in a mind that sees solutions instead of problems." Heat rose in Ellie's cheeks at his words. "You make me sound remarkable, aren't you?" His smile was warm in the firelight. "The woman who traveled 1,000 miles on nothing but a promise, who rebuilt her life when that promise shattered, who faces down bankers and cattle barons without flinching." Something tight and long-held began to unravel in Ellie's chest. All her life, she'd measured herself against standards she could never meet: youth, beauty, conventional feminine charm. She'd accepted Frederick Mason's rejection as merely confirmation of what she'd always known. Yet here was a man who couldn't see her gray hair or the lines around her eyes, who judged her solely on her actions and character, and found her not merely acceptable, but admirable. Before she could respond, Scout's bark shattered the moment. The dog leaped to his feet, hackles raised as he raced to the door. Gabe was up in an instant, reaching for the rifle. "Someone's outside!" Ellie moved to the window, peering into the darkness. "I don't see... Wait." A flicker of movement caught her eye. "There's someone by the barn." The sound of splintering wood echoed across the yard, followed by the frightened whinnying of horses. "They're breaking into the barn," Gabe said, already, moving toward the door. "Wait," Ellie grabbed his arm. "You can't just walk out there blind." "I know every inch of this land," he replied, his voice hard with determination, "and I won't be intimidated in my own home." "Then I'm coming with you. She reached for the revolver he'd insisted she learn to use. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, even if 1 set belongs to me. Despite the gravity of the situation, Gabe's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I can't argue with that logic. Together, they stepped onto the porch, Scout ranging ahead of them. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered like frost across a black sky. From the barn came the sound of movement, the horses still whinnying in distress. "Stay close," Gabe murmured. "Talk to me. Be my eyes." They moved across the yard, Ellie describing the scene in a whisper. 2 horses tied at the corner of the barn. The small door is open. I can see light inside. They have a lantern. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the barn. A man in a dark coat, carrying something Ellie couldn't make out in the shadows. Scout's growl deepened. "Hold it right there," Gabe called, raising the rifle. "This is private property." The man froze, then lunged back toward the barn. A second figure appeared in the doorway. "It's the blind man," the first one called, "and the old woman." Ellie's finger tightened on the trigger of her revolver. "I may be old," she said clearly, "but I can still put a bullet where it counts." The men hesitated, exchanging glances. Then, with surprising speed, they raced for their horses. "They're running," Ellie reported, tracking their movement, heading east toward Mason's land. Gabe lowered his rifle slightly. "Let them go. But remember their voices if you can. We may need to identify them later." Once the sound of hoofbeats had faded, they approached the barn cautiously. Inside, the horses were agitated but unharmed. The tack room door hung open, its lock broken. "They were stealing tack?" Ellie asked, confused. "Seems a petty crime for Mason's men." Gabe ran his hands over the bridles hanging on the wall, feeling carefully. Not stealing, sabotaging. His fingers found what he was searching for, a slice in the leather of his best saddle, hidden but deep, that would have snapped under his weight. Checking the cinch is second nature to any rancher, but with bridles and reins. "You might not notice until it was too late," Ellie finished, horrified at the calculated cruelty of it. "They meant for you to be injured, or worse. A riding accident. Tragic, but not suspicious." Gabe's face was grim, especially for a blind man foolish enough to ride alone. The knowledge settled cold in Ellie's stomach. This wasn't just about land or water rights anymore. Mason was willing to risk Gabe's life to get what he wanted. "We should report this to the sheriff," she insisted. Gabe shook his head. "Sheriff Davis owes his position to Mason's influence. He'd do nothing." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Ellie had come to recognize as frustration. "No, our best protection now is preparation, and completing that cattle drive successfully, it's the only way we'll make the mortgage payment." Back in the house, Ellie built up the fire, while Gabe checked doors and windows. Neither mentioned sleep, though it was well past midnight. The violation of their sanctuary had left them both too alert, too aware of the fragility of their security. "What if we went public?" Ellie suggested suddenly. "Told people what Mason is doing?" "With what proof?" Gabe settled into his chair. "By the fire. 2 men whose faces we couldn't identify, tampering with tack. Mason would deny everything. Then we get proof, documents, witnesses." Ellie paced the room, her mind racing. "Martha said Mason's meeting with other cattle barons next week. What if we knew what they were planning?" Gabe raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting espionage now, Miss Wilson?" Despite everything, Ellie laughed. "I suppose I am. Coming here has made me surprisingly bold." "You were always bold," Gabe countered. "You just needed the right circumstance to discover it." He considered her suggestion. "Mason's meeting will be at his ranch house. Heavily guarded, I'm sure." "But the Silver Creek Harvest Festival is the day before," Ellie reminded him. "Everyone in the county attends, even Frederick Mason. He'd want to be seen, playing the benevolent local leader." Understanding dawned on Gabe's face. And his, house would be less guarded. Precisely. Ellie sat across from him, leaning forward intently, though he couldn't see her excitement. You said Ethan's father used to work for Mason before he was dismissed last winter. Yes, as a stable master. He'd know the layout of the ranch house. Gabe shook his head in amused disbelief. You're really planning this, aren't you? I am. Ellie's voice was firm. I didn't travel all this way, start a new life, only to watch greedy men destroy what you've built. She reached out impulsively and took his hand. What we're building. Gabe's fingers curled around hers, strong and sure. Ellie Wilson, he said softly, you continue to surprise me. Good, she replied. I'd hate to become predictable at my age. His laugh warmed her more than the fire. For the first time since Frederick Mason's rejection, Ellie felt truly seen. Not for what she appeared to be, but for who she was at her core. A woman of substance, of courage. A woman worth fighting beside. The days before the harvest festival passed in a whirlwind of preparation. By day, they maintained normal routines, tending cattle, repairing equipment, preserving the last garden vegetables for winter. By night, they planned their intelligence-gathering mission with the precision of military strategists. Ethan's father, a weathered man named Joseph, arrived one evening to share his knowledge of Mason's ranch house. His grudge against his former employer was evident in every bitter word. The study is where he keeps his important papers, Joseph explained, sketching a rough map on a piece of paper. Second door on the right from the main entrance has a big oak desk by the window. And the staff? Ellie asked. Housekeeper lives in, but she'll be at the festival with the rest. Mason insists everyone attend to show what a generous employer he is. Joseph's lip curled in disgust. There's usually a man watching the house when it's empty, but he stays by the main door. The study window faces the garden away from the road. It could work, Gabe said thoughtfully, if someone could. Slip away during the festival, reach the house undetected. I'll do it, Ellie volunteered without hesitation. Absolutely not, Gabe countered immediately. It's too dangerous. I'm the logical choice. No one would suspect me. And unlike you or Joseph, I can blend into the background. Being plain and middle-aged has its advantages. People look right through me. Joseph nodded reluctantly. She's right, Sullivan. A woman would raise less suspicion if caught wandering near the house. Could claim she got lost looking for the necessary. Gabe's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue further. Later, when they were alone, he paced the kitchen as Ellie prepared supper. I don't like this plan, he said finally. Not your part in it. Ellie set down the knife she was using to chop vegetables. Because you don't trust me to succeed? Because I couldn't bear it if something happened to you? The raw emotion in his voice stopped her breath. These past weeks, you've become important to me, Ellie. More than I expected, more than is probably wise. She moved to him, taking his restless hands in hers. And you to me. The admission was easier than she'd imagined, which is precisely why I need to do this. Not just for Whispering Pine, but for us. Us, he repeated softly, as if testing the word for its reality. Is there an us, Ellie Wilson? I believe there is, she replied, her heart racing at the boldness of her own words. If you want there to be. His hands released hers only to find her face, fingers gentle as they traced her features, the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the softness of her lips. It was the most intimate gesture she had ever experienced. His touch creating a portrait only he could see. I want that very much, he whispered, but not at the cost of your safety. Then help me prepare, she countered. Teach me what to look for in Mason's papers, how to move silently, how to stay calm if surprised. She placed her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. Trust me to be as capable as you've always believed me to be. He sighed, conceding the point. Very well, but you'll take the revolver. And at the first sign of trouble, you'll abandon the plan and return to the festival. Promise me." "I promise," she said solemnly. Then, with a lightness she hardly recognized in herself, she added, "Besides, I'm rather looking forward to playing the spy. All those novels I read to my students are finally proving useful." Gabe's smile returned reluctantly. "Just remember, this isn't a novel, Ellie. The dangers are real. As are the consequences of doing nothing," she reminded him gently. The morning of the Silver Creek Harvest Festival dawned clear and cold, the mountains sharp against a cloudless sky. Ellie dressed with particular care in the blue dress she'd altered from Gabe's mother's trunk, adding a lace collar she'd found in the attic and pinning her hair less severely than usual. Small vanities, perhaps, but today she needed all the confidence she could muster. Downstairs, she found Gabe already dressed in his best shirt and waistcoat, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. Even Scout seemed to understand the occasion's importance, sitting alertly by the door instead of sprawling by the fire. "You look beautiful," Gabe said as she entered the kitchen. At her surprised silence, he smiled. "I can hear it in the way you move, more deliberate, the rustle of your best dress. And you smell of lavender water. You're remarkably observant. For a blind man," she said, touched by his attention to details others might miss. "I see things differently, not less." He offered his arm. "Shall we face Frederick Mason and his festival together, Miss Wilson?" She took it, feeling the strength beneath the fabric of his sleeve. "With pleasure, Mr. Sullivan." The ride to town was filled with last-minute planning. Ellie would remain with Gabe until early afternoon, when the pie judging would draw the largest crowd. Then she would slip away, taking the back road to Mason's ranch as Joseph had instructed. If all went well, she would be back before anyone noticed her absence, with whatever information she could gather about Mason's plans. Silver Creek was transformed for the festival. Bunting hung from the storefronts, tables lined the main street. Laden with harvest bounty, and a small band played near the church steps. It seemed the entire county had turned out, farmers and ranchers mingling with townspeople in a rare display of community. Ellie felt the stares as they made their way through the crowd. Later, when they were alone, he paced the kitchen as Ellie prepared supper. "I don't like this plan," he said finally. "Not your part in it." Ellie set down the knife she was using to chop vegetables. "Because you don't trust me to succeed? Because I couldn't bear it if something happened to you?" The raw emotion in his voice stopped her breath. "These past weeks, you've become important to me, Ellie. More than I expected, more than is probably wise." She moved to him, taking his restless hands in hers. "And you to me." The admission was easier than she'd imagined, which is precisely why I need to do this. Not just for Whispering Pine, but for us. Us, he repeated softly, as if testing the word for its reality. "Is there an us, Ellie Wilson?" "I believe there is," she replied, her heart racing at the boldness of her own words. "If you want there to be." His hands released hers only to find her face, fingers gentle as they traced her features, the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the softness of her lips. It was the most intimate gesture she had ever experienced, his touch creating a portrait only he could see. "I want that very much," he whispered, "but not at the cost of your safety." "Then help me prepare," she countered. "Teach me what to look for in Mason's papers, how to move silently, how to stay calm if surprised." She placed her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. "Trust me to be as capable as you've always believed me to be." He sighed, conceding the point. "Very well, but you'll take the revolver. And at the first sign of trouble, you'll abandon the plan and return to the festival. Promise me." "I promise," she said solemnly. Then, with a lightness she hardly recognized in herself, she added, "Besides, I'm rather looking forward to playing The Spy. All those novels I read to my students are finally proving useful. Gabe's smile returned reluctantly. Just remember, this isn't a novel, Ellie. The dangers are real. As are the consequences of doing nothing, she reminded him gently. The morning of the Silver Creek Harvest Festival dawned clear and cold, the mountains sharp against a cloudless sky. Ellie dressed with particular care in the blue dress she'd altered from Gabe's mother's trunk, adding a lace collar she'd found in the attic and pinning her hair less severely than usual. Small vanities, perhaps, but today she needed all the confidence she could muster. Downstairs, she found Gabe already dressed in his best shirt and waistcoat, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. Even Scout seemed to understand the occasion's importance, sitting alertly by the door instead of sprawling by the fire. "You look beautiful," Gabe said as she entered the kitchen. At her surprised silence, he smiled. "I can hear it in the way you move, more deliberate, the rustle of your best dress, and you smell of lavender water. You're remarkably observant. For a blind man," she said, touched by his attention to details others might miss. "I see things differently, not less." He offered his arm. "Shall we face Frederick Mason and his festival together, Miss Wilson?" She took it, feeling the strength beneath the fabric of his sleeve. "With pleasure, Mr. Sullivan." The ride to town was filled with last-minute planning. Ellie would remain with Gabe until early afternoon, when the pie judging would draw the largest crowd. Then she would slip away, taking the back road to Mason's ranch as Joseph had instructed. If all went well, she would be back before anyone noticed her absence, with whatever information she could gather about Mason's plans. Silver Creek was transformed for the festival. Bunting hung from the storefronts, tables lined the main street. Laden with harvest bounty, and a small band played near the church steps. It seemed the entire county had turned out, farmers and ranchers mingling with townspeople in a rare display of community. Ellie felt the stares as they made their way through the crowd. The blind rancher and his plain, middle-aged housekeeper were an unexpected pair at such a social event. She straightened her shoulders, matching her stride to Gabe's confident gait. Martha Hayes found them near the central square, her face alight with genuine pleasure. "You came, and looking splendid, both of you." She lowered her voice. "Mason's already here, holding court by the judging table, acting like the king of the county." "Is Blackwood with him?" Gabe asked quietly. "No. Thank heavens, he's in Helena on banking business, or so they say." Martha squeezed Ellie's arm. "I've saved you a spot for your woodwork, Gabe. Best location in the display area." They followed her to a small table beneath a canvas awning. Gabe had brought his finest pieces: bowls, spoons, a delicately carved jewelry box that had taken him weeks to complete. Ellie arranged them carefully, aware of the quality they represented. "These are beautiful," said a woman examining the jewelry box. "Such craftsmanship." "Thank you," Gabe replied. "My father taught me years ago." The woman looked up, startled to find the artisan was blind. But instead of the awkward pity Ellie had come to expect from strangers, the woman merely nodded. Approvingly, "He taught you well. How much for the box? My daughter is getting married next spring." By midday, half of Gabe's pieces had sold, and a furniture maker from Bozeman had commissioned a dozen bowls for his shop. Ellie watched Gabe's proud smile as he negotiated terms, his confidence growing with each successful transaction. "Quite the entrepreneur, our Mr. Sullivan." The voice behind her made Ellie stiffen. She turned to find Frederick Mason watching. Them, impeccably dressed in a suit that spoke of Eastern tailoring and wealth. "Mr. Mason," she acknowledged coolly, "are you enjoying the festival?" "Immensely." His eyes traveled over her with an evaluation that made her skin crawl. "Blue becomes you, Miss Wilson. I hadn't noticed before." "There's a great deal you failed to notice, I expect." Mason's smile tightened at her barb. "I see Sullivan is putting your loyalty to good use. How charming to watch you champion him." He lowered his voice. "But how long before you tire of playing nursemaid to a cripple on a failing ranch?" Before Ellie could retort, Gabe appeared at her side, Scout preceding him through the crowd. "Mason," he greeted evenly. "I trust you're not bothering my companion." "Not at all. Simply admiring Miss Wilson's dedication to your enterprise." Mason's gaze flickered to the nearly empty display table. Selling trinkets at the festival, a noble effort, if futile. "The mortgage comes due in 2 weeks, Sullivan. No amount of wooden spoons will save Whispering Pine." "Perhaps not," Gabe agreed mildly. "But they're a start, and unlike some, I believe in honest work for honest pay." A flush crept up Mason's neck at the implied insult. "Enjoy your day, Sullivan. It may be your last festival as a property owner." He tipped his hat to Ellie with mock courtesy. "Miss Wilson." And then, as he strode away, Ellie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That man is insufferable." "But informative," Gabe noted. "He's confident about foreclosure, which means he has something planned before the mortgage payment is due." He touched her arm lightly. "Are you still determined to go through with our plan?" Ellie glanced across the square to where the crowd was gathering for the pie judging. Martha stood near the front, waving for their attention. "More than ever," she said with quiet resolve. "I'll slip away now, while everyone's distracted." "Be careful," Gabe whispered, his fingers tightening briefly around hers. "Come back to me." The simple plea touched her deeply. "I will," she promised, and meant it with her whole heart. Slipping through the festival crowd was easier than Ellie had anticipated. Everyone's attention was fixed on the judging table, where Mason was preparing to announce the winners with his usual theatrical flair. No one noticed a plain woman in a blue dress walking purposefully toward the edge of town. Once past the last buildings, Ellie left the main road as Joseph had instructed, taking a little used path that wound behind properties and through a stand of cottonwoods before emerging near the back of Mason's impressive ranch house. The walk took 20 minutes, her heart pounding with each step. The house stood on a small rise, a grand 2-story structure with a wide veranda and tall windows. From her position among the trees, Ellie could see a single guard smoking lazily by the front steps, just as Joseph had predicted. The garden side appeared deserted. Taking a deep breath, she removed her shoes, tucking them behind a tree stump where she could retrieve them later. Stockinged feet would make less noise on the wooden floors inside. Then, moving from tree to tree for cover, she approached the house from the garden side. The study window was exactly where Joseph had described, large, facing south with heavy curtains partially drawn against the afternoon sun. Testing it gently, Ellie found it unlocked, sliding upward with only the faintest squeak. She paused, listening for any reaction from within the house. Hearing nothing, she gathered her skirts and climbed through the window with as much dignity as the situation allowed. Mason's study was a testament to his self-importance. Leather-bound books lining walls he probably never read, mounted animal heads staring glassily from above the fireplace, and an enormous desk positioned to intimidate anyone seated across from it. The room smelled of cigars and furniture polish. Moving silently to the desk, Ellie began her search. The top held nothing of interest. Correspondence about cattle sales, an invitation to a governor's dinner in Helena, a half-written letter to an investor in Chicago. She tried the drawers, finding the top 2 unlocked. The third drawer stuck, then yielded to firmer pressure. Inside lay a leather folder stamped Silver Creek Development Company. Ellie opened it with trembling fingers. What she found made her blood run cold. Maps of the valley with property boundaries clearly marked. Lists of ranchers with notes beside each name. Foreclosure proceedings, pressure to sell, committed to purchase. legal documents outlining a plan to dam the creek that ran through Whispering Pine, creating a reservoir that would divert water to lands owned by a consortium headed by Frederick Mason. And there, on the final page, a legislative proposal to the territorial government. If passed, it would grant eminent domain to the Silver Creek Development Company for infrastructure improvements beneficial to territorial development. They weren't just trying to buy Whispering Pine. They were preparing to take it by force. Of law, if necessary. Ellie heard a floorboard creak in the hallway outside the study. Quickly, she removed several pages from the folder, the most damning evidence of the conspiracy, and tucked them into her bodice. Then she replaced the folder and closed the drawer, just as the door handle began to turn. There was no time to reach the window. Instead, Ellie dropped to the floor, rolling beneath the massive desk just as the door opened. 2 sets of boots entered her field of vision, polished leather and dusty work boots. The latter belonged to Silas Blackwood, his voice unmistakable as he continued what was clearly an ongoing conversation. Ahead of schedule, the judge signed the order this morning in Helena. We don't need to wait for Sullivan to miss the mortgage payment now. Excellent. Frederick Mason moved behind the desk, so close that Ellie could see the pattern in his trouser fabric as he settled into his chair. His feet were inches from her skirts. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared they might hear it. The legal documents will be delivered tomorrow, Mason continued, pulling open the drawer Ellie had just searched. She held her breath as his hand reached in, extracting the leather folder. Once Sullivan served with the eminent domain notice, he'll have 48 hours to vacate the property. What about his livestock? Blackwood asked, settling into a chair across from Mason. He can take the cattle if he can move them in time, the water rights and land transfer immediately. Mason opened the folder, flipping through the contents. Where's the map with the dam specifications? I wanted to show it to Reynolds when he arrives from Helena. Ellie pressed herself flatter against the floor as Mason rifled through the folder with increasing agitation. It was here yesterday, he muttered, along with the legislative proposal draft. Maybe your housekeeper moved it during cleaning, Blackwood suggested. She knows better than to touch anything in my study. Mason slammed the folder down. Check the safe. Maybe I locked it up after our last meeting. Blackwood rose and moved to a painting beside the fireplace, a garish western scene of cattle crossing a river. He swung it aside, revealing a small wall safe. As he began to work the combination, Ellie realized this might be her only chance to escape. With both men's attention focused on the safe, she inched backward beneath the desk, toward the window she'd left partially open. The heavy curtains would provide momentary cover if she could reach them without being seen. Mason cursed under his breath. There's nothing in here about the dam project either, just the bank documents and property deeds. Could Sullivan have gotten wind of the plan somehow? Blackwood asked. That school teacher of his seems sharper than she looks. Impossible. No one outside our group knows the details. Mason's chair scraped back suddenly. Unless... Ellie froze as Mason's boots turned toward the window. That window was closed this morning. In a desperate move, Ellie rolled from beneath the desk toward the curtains, praying the heavy fabric would mask her movement. She reached the window just as Mason rounded the desk. Someone's been in here, he shouted, spotting the disturbance in the curtains. Ellie didn't hesitate. She flung herself through the open window, landing awkwardly in the soft earth of the garden bed below. Pain shot through her ankle, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She scrambled to her feet and ran for the trees, abandoning her shoes in favor of speed. Behind her, she heard Mason's bellow of rage. Find her, she's taken my papers. Ellie ran as she hadn't run since girlhood, heart hammering, breath coming in gasps. The stockings on her feet shredded against rocks and twigs, but she barely felt the pain. All that mattered was reaching the festival before Mason and Blackwood could overtake her. The shortcut through the cottonwoods seemed longer on the return journey, each shadow potentially hiding one of Mason's men. She heard shouts in the distance, the pounding of hooves as riders were dispatched to search for her. Finally, the edge of town came into view. Ellie slowed to a walk, trying to compose herself despite her disheveled appearance and muddy, torn stockings. She couldn't afford to draw attention now. The festival was still in full swing, the crowd even larger than when she'd left. Music floated on the air, along with the smell of food and the sound of laughter. Ellie slipped between groups of merrymakers, searching desperately for Gabe. She found him where she'd left him, sitting beside their nearly empty display table with Scout at his feet. Martha Hayes stood nearby, talking animatedly about the pie competition. Neither noticed Ellie's approach until Scout's ears perked up, his tail wagging in recognition. "Ellie?" Gabe turned toward the sound of her footsteps, tension evident in every line of his body. "Thank God. You were gone so long, I was afraid." "We need to leave," she interrupted, her voice low and urgent. "Now, I found what we needed. But Mason discovered someone was in his study. They're searching for me." Martha's eyes widened as she took in Ellie's appearance. "Heavens, child, what happened to your feet?" "Lost my shoes in the escape. It doesn't matter." Ellie gripped Gabe's arm. "Please, we must go before they reach the festival." Understanding the urgency, Gabe stood immediately. "Our wagon's behind the general store. Martha, can you—" "I'll take care of the remaining woodwork," Martha assured him. "Go, quickly. Use the back alleys." They made their way through town as inconspicuously as possible, Ellie limping slightly from her injured ankle. Scout led the way, with Gabe holding Ellie's arm, an arrangement that looked to casual observers like a blind man being assisted rather than the reverse. "Did you get what we needed?" Gabe asked as they turned down the narrow passage between the saloon and the hardware store. "Yes, maps, legislative proposals, everything." Ellie patted her bodice where the papers crinkled reassuringly. "But it's worse than we thought. They've already filed for eminent domain. They plan to serve you with papers tomorrow." Gabe's step faltered momentarily. "Eminent domain? They can't—" "They can, with the territorial judge in their pocket. They're claiming it's for infrastructure development, a dam across the creek." Ellie's voice broke. "They're giving you 48 hours to vacate." A muscle worked in Gabe's jaw, but he kept moving forward. "Then we have 48 hours to fight back. First, we need to get you safely home." They reached the wagon without incident. Gabe helped Ellie onto the seat, his touch gentle on her arm. "Your ankle's swollen. I can feel the heat of it through your dress." "It's just a sprain," she assured him, touched by his concern even in the midst of crisis. "Nothing compared to what we're facing." As Gabe took the reins, a commotion erupted at the far end of the main street. Riders were entering the festival grounds at a gallop, led by Silas Blackwood. Behind him, Frederick Mason drove a small buggy, his face dark with fury. "They're here," Ellie whispered, shrinking back instinctively. Gabe flicked the reins, turning the wagon down a side street. "They'll check the roads. We'll take the creek trail. It's rougher but less likely to be watched." The journey home was tense, every sound in the forest making them start. Gabe guided the horses with the surety born of years navigating familiar terrain, following the gentle burble of the creek that would lead them to Whispering Pine. "Tell me everything you found," he said as they traveled, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. Ellie recounted the contents of the folder, describing the maps and documents in detail. "The most damning part is the legislative proposal. It's designed to look like public infrastructure, but it's really about giving Mason control of all the water resources in the valley. And with water rights, he controls everything," Gabe concluded grimly. "No ranch can survive without access to water." The sun was setting by the time they reached Whispering Pine, the western sky aflame with crimson and gold. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled in the near pasture for the night. Nothing seemed disturbed yet. Gabe helped Ellie down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "Are you certain you weren't recognized at Mason's house?" "I don't think so," she replied, wincing slightly as her injured ankle took her weight. "But they know someone took those papers. It won't take them long to put it together, especially when they realize we left the festival early." Inside, Ellie retrieved the documents from her bodice, spreading them on the kitchen table. Together, they examined the evidence of the conspiracy. Gabe, running his sensitive fingers over the maps where Ellie had described the planned dam location, listening intently as she read the legal language of the eminent domain filing. "These men have thought of everything," she said finally, defeat threatening to overwhelm her. "They have the money, the political connections, the legal authority." "But they don't have public opinion," Gabe countered, his face lit with sudden inspiration. "Not yet." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Ellie. This plan relies on secrecy, on deals made behind closed doors, on the assumption that small ranchers like me will surrender quietly when faced with legal documents we can't afford to fight." Understanding dawned. "But if everyone knew what they were planning—" "Exactly." Gabe paced the kitchen, energized. "The territorial legislature doesn't want a scandal. The governor's up for re-election next year. If enough people protest, they might back down from supporting Mason's scheme." Ellie considered the idea. "We'd need to spread the word quickly. Before they serve you with those papers tomorrow, Martha can help, and Joseph. We'll make copies of the most damning sections, distribute them to every ranch in the valley tonight." Gabe's face was alight with renewed determination. "Mason and his cronies might own the judge, but they don't own the people of Silver Creek. Not yet." As night fell, their kitchen became a center of furtive activity. Tommy arrived with his father, having been sent by Martha with a warning that Mason's men were searching the road to Whispering Pine. Joseph brought 3 more trusted ranchers, men who had already felt the pressure of Mason's expanding influence. Ellie copied the documents by lamplight, her teacher's penmanship clear and precise despite her exhaustion. The men huddled around the table, expressions grim as they realized the scope of Mason's plan. "He's trying to create a monopoly on water," said Wilson Taylor, an older rancher whose property bordered Mason's. "Once he controls the dam, he'll charge whatever he wants for access. We'll all be at his mercy, or forced to sell to him at whatever price he offers," added another. Gabe stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding despite his blindness. "We need every small landowner in the valley at the territorial office tomorrow when they try to serve me with these papers. Show the officials that we know what's happening and we won't stand for it. We'll spread the word tonight," Joseph promised. "Riders to every ranch within 20 miles. As the men prepared to leave, distributing the copied documents and planning their routes, Ellie pulled Gabe aside. "What if it's not enough?" she asked quietly. "What if they serve the papers anyway?" Gabe's face was solemn in the lamplight. "Then we resist legally for as long as we can, file countersuits, demand public hearings." His hand found hers in the shadows. "I won't give up Whispering Pine without a fight, Ellie. Not now that I have someone worth fighting for." The warmth of his words sustained her through the long night that followed. Sleep was impossible with so much at stake. Instead, they sat together by the fire, making plans, finding strength in each other's resolve. Dawn broke clear and cold, the morning sun gilding the pines and touching the mountain peaks with flame. Ellie stood on the porch, watching the eastern sky lighten, trying to quiet the apprehension that twisted in her stomach. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Gabe said, joining her. Though he couldn't see the sunrise, the warmth on his face told him its location. "Yes," she agreed, "worth fighting for." He smiled, reaching for her hand. "We should prepare. They'll be coming soon." They dressed with care. Gabe in his best suit, the one he'd worn to the festival. Ellie in her blue dress, mended and brushed clean of yesterday's adventure. Together, they ate a simple breakfast, neither mentioning the possibility that it might be their last meal at Whispering Pine. The sound of approaching riders reached them just as they finished washing the dishes. Scout barked a warning, racing to the door. "How many?" Gabe asked, reaching for his coat. Ellie peered through the window. "4. Blackwood is leading them. There's a man in a suit I don't recognize. Looks official. The territorial officer, most likely, here to serve the papers." Ellie's hand went instinctively to the pocket of her dress, where she'd placed the most damning of the copied documents. "And the others? Mason's men, I expect, to make sure I don't cause trouble." Gabe's voice was calm, but Ellie could see the tension in his shoulders. "Are you ready?" "Yes," she replied, straightening her spine. She had faced worse than Silas Blackwood in her life. Classroom bullies, dismissive school boards, Frederick Mason's rejection. She would not be intimidated in her own home. They stepped onto the porch together, a united front as the riders dismounted in the yard. Scout stood at attention beside Gabe, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Sullivan," Blackwood called, his satisfaction evident even at a distance. "We have official business with you today." "So I gathered," Gabe replied evenly. "What can I do for the Silver Creek Bank this morning, Mr. Blackwood?" The official-looking man stepped forward, leather portfolio in hand. "Gabriel Sullivan, I'm Howard Keene, representing the Territorial Land Office. I'm here to serve you with a notice of eminent domain proceedings against your property." "On what grounds?" Gabe asked, though they already knew the answer. "Infrastructure development," Keene replied, unfolding an official-looking document. "The territory has approved the Silver Creek Development Company's proposal to construct a dam and reservoir system to benefit agricultural development in the region. A dam that would just happen to divert water away from small ranchers like me and toward Frederick Mason's new cattle operation," Gabe observed. Keene's expression flickered with discomfort. "I'm just here to deliver the legal notice, Mr. Sullivan. You have 48 hours to vacate the property. You may remove personal belongings and livestock, but the land and water rights transfer to the territory effective immediately. And if I refuse, then the sheriff will remove you by force." Blackwood's voice held no attempt to hide his pleasure at the prospect. "The law is the law, Sullivan." "Indeed it is," came a new voice from behind the riders, "and the law requires transparency and public hearings for eminent domain proceedings, neither of which has occurred in this case." All heads turned to find Martha Hayes driving a wagon up the path to the house. Behind her came more vehicles and riders, at least 20 local ranchers and townspeople, with more visible on the road beyond. Blackwood's face darkened. "This doesn't concern you, Mrs. Hayes, or any of you." He addressed the growing crowd. "This is official territorial business." "It concerns all of us," Martha replied, climbing down from her wagon with surprising agility for a woman of her size. "Especially when it's being done in secret to benefit one man at the expense of everyone else." The territorial officer shifted uncomfortably as more people arrived, surrounding his small party. "What is the meaning of this?" Ellie stepped forward, the copied documents clutched in her hand. "The meaning, Mr. Keene, is that we are aware of the true purpose behind this so-called infrastructure project." She handed him the papers. "These are copies of documents from Frederick Mason's private files, detailing how the dam is actually designed to divert water from small ranches to his new cattle operation. There was no public notice, no hearing, no opportunity for affected landowners to object." Keene scanned the papers, his frown deepening. "These appear to be private business documents. How did you obtain them? That's irrelevant, Martha interjected. The question is whether you're willing to be party to a corrupt scheme that violates territorial law regarding water rights. The gathering crowd murmured in agreement, faces set with determination. They were not a mob. They were neighbors and friends, small business owners and ranchers who recognized that their own futures were tied to the outcome of this confrontation. Keene looked from the papers to the crowd, then to Blackwood, whose face had gone from confident to concerned. This changes things, Keene said finally. At minimum, there would need to be a public hearing before any eminent domain action could proceed. This is absurd, Blackwood snapped. These people have no standing to interfere with a legal proceeding. On the contrary, said a deep voice from the back of the crowd. The people parted to reveal a distinguished older man on horseback, silver-haired and straight-backed, despite his years. As territorial senator, I believe I have considerable standing in this matter. Ellie glanced at Gabe, whose face registered surprise and recognition. Senator Wallace, he murmured. Martha must have reached him. The senator dismounted, approaching the territorial officer with the confidence of long authority. Mr. Keene, I suggest you return to Helena with these documents. Inform the land office that I am calling for an immediate investigation into the approval process for this project. Senator, with all due respect, Blackwood began, the approvals have already been granted based on incomplete and possibly fraudulent information, Wallace finished for him. I sat on the Water Commission for 15 years, Mr. Blackwood. I know the legal requirements for projects affecting watershed rights. None of those requirements appear to have been met here. Keene hesitated, clearly calculating where his best interests lay. Finally, he folded the eminent domain notice and returned it to his portfolio. I believe the prudent course would be to suspend these proceedings pending further review. No! Blackwood exploded, turning to the territorial officer. Mason will have your job for this. Perhaps, Keene acknowledged. But Senator Wallace could have more than my job if I proceed with a legally questionable action after being presented with evidence of irregularities. He tipped his hat to Gabe. Mr. Sullivan, consider these proceedings temporarily suspended. You'll be notified of the hearing date once it's established. As Keene mounted his horse, Blackwood remained, his face contorted with fury. This isn't over, Sullivan, not by a long shot. I believe it is for today, Gabe replied calmly. You're trespassing on private property, Mr. Blackwood. I suggest you leave before these good people decide to escort you off my land. The implied threat, backed by 24 grim-faced ranchers, was enough. Blackwood and his men mounted up, following Keene down the path toward town. Only when they were out of sight did the tension break, the gathered neighbors erupting in cheers and back-slapping congratulations. Senator Wallace approached Gabe and Ellie on the porch, his weathered face creased in a smile. Gabriel Sullivan, it's been too long. Senator, Gabe acknowledged, extending his hand. I didn't know you were in Silver Creek. I wasn't until Martha's urgent message reached me in Helena last night. Wallace shook Gabe's hand warmly. I rode straight through. Your father was one of my oldest friends. I couldn't stand by while his legacy was stolen through bureaucratic trickery. We're grateful for your intervention, Ellie said. Wallace turned to her with interest. And you must be the schoolteacher who discovered Mason's plans. Martha told me of your bravery. Ellie blushed at the praise. I did what was necessary to protect Whispering Pine and the entire valley from the looks of these documents. Wallace held up the papers Ellie had provided. This scheme would have affected water access for dozens of small ranches. Mason and his investors were attempting nothing less than a hostile takeover of the region's most precious resource. The gathered neighbors pressed closer, eager to hear the senator's assessment of their situation. Wallace obliged, explaining how the fight was far from over. Mason's wealth and connections meant he would regroup quickly, but for today, at least, they had won a critical reprieve. As the impromptu gathering evolved into a celebration, Martha produced food from her wagon and someone began playing a fiddle. The yard of Whispering Pine became a scene of community solidarity, unlike anything Ellie had witnessed since arriving in Montana. "You did this," Gabe said quietly, finding her amidst the crowd. "You brought these people together." "We did it," she corrected him. "It was your reputation, your father's legacy that made them willing to stand with us." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with the sounds of conversation and music as their neighbors celebrated this small victory. Ellie found herself studying Gabe's profile in the autumn sunlight. The strong line of his jaw, the quiet dignity in his bearing, the way his unseeing eyes somehow still conveyed his every emotion. "What are you thinking?" he asked, sensing her gaze. "That I'm grateful Frederick Mason found me too plain to marry," she replied honestly. "Otherwise, I would never have found my way to Whispering Pine. To you." Gabe's smile was tender as he reached for her hand. "His loss, my immeasurable gain." The celebration continued into the afternoon. Neighbors sharing stories of their own encounters with Mason's expanding influence, plans forming for a united front at the upcoming public hearing. Senator Wallace promised legal support, his political weight a powerful counterbalance to Mason's financial resources. As the sun began its westward descent, the crowd gradually dispersed, returning to their own ranches with renewed hope and determination. Martha was the last to leave, embracing Ellie fiercely before climbing into her wagon. "You've lit quite a fire in this valley," she said approvingly. "Frederick Mason won't know what hit him." "We've only won a postponement," Ellie cautioned. "The real fight is still ahead." "Yes, but now you're not fighting alone." Martha's eyes twinkled mischievously. "And I suspect you're not just fighting for the ranch anymore, are you?" Ellie's gaze drifted to where Gabe stood saying goodbye to Senator Wallace, his face animated with purpose and hope. "No," she admitted softly, "not just for the ranch." Martha squeezed her hand knowingly. "Some treasures are discovered only when we're forced to look beyond the surface, my dear. Remember that." As the final wagon disappeared down the road, a profound quiet settled over Whispering Pine. Ellie and Gabe stood on the porch, the afternoon sun warming their faces. Scout sprawled contentedly at their feet. "What happens now?" Ellie asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Gabe turned toward her voice. "We prepare for the hearing, gather more support, make our case as strong as possible." His hand found hers, fingers interlacing with natural ease. "We fight for what matters, Ellie, together." The simple declaration held such certainty, such quiet strength, that Ellie felt tears prick her eyes, not tears of sadness or fear, but of recognition, of finding, at last, a place and a person worth every risk she'd taken. "Together," she echoed, the word a promise, as the sun gilded the pines and the mountains stood witness to this new beginning. As dusk settled over the valley, turning the distant peaks to silhouettes against the darkening sky, Ellie and Gabe remained on the porch, reluctant to break the spell of the day's unexpected victory. Scout lay at their feet, occasionally lifting his head at distant sounds, before settling back to his contented dozing. "It's beautiful tonight," Ellie said softly, describing the sunset's fading colors for Gabe. "The sky is deepening to purple, with just a trace of orange along the western ridge. The first stars are appearing." "I remember what stars look like," Gabe replied, his face turned upward. "Tiny points of light in endless darkness. When I first lost my sight, I thought that's all I'd ever see again. Darkness. But I was wrong." "How so?" Ellie asked. Darkness isn't empty, it's full of sounds, scents, textures. His hand found hers again, fingers gently tracing her palm. And sometimes, unexpected light. The tenderness in his voice made Ellie's heart quicken. In the weeks since she'd arrived at Whispering Pine, something had grown between them, a connection deeper than employer and housekeeper, more profound than mere friendship. Today's events had only strengthened that bond, revealing how perfectly they complemented each other. "We should go inside," she said finally, mindful of the cooling night air. "It's been a long day." In the kitchen, she busied herself preparing a simple supper, the familiar routine grounding her after the day's emotional tumult. Gabe built up the fire, moving around the house with the confidence of long practice. As they sat down to eat, a comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional clink of utensils against plates. It was Gabe who finally spoke, his expression thoughtful. "I've been considering something, Ellie. Something important." She looked up, catching the seriousness in his tone. "Yes?" "This fight with Mason. It's going to get worse before it gets better. The hearing will be contentious. There might be reprisals." He set down his fork, focusing his unseeing gaze in her direction. "I wouldn't blame you if you decided this was more than you bargained for when you accepted the position. Here. Are you asking me to leave?" The possibility sent a cold shock through her. "No," he said quickly. "God, no, I'm trying rather poorly to say that your presence here has become essential to me. Not just as my housekeeper or assistant, but as..." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "As the person who makes Whispering Pine feel like home again?" Ellie's breath caught. "Gabe, please let me finish while I have the courage." He reached across the table, finding her hand with unerring accuracy. "I know we've known each other only a short time. I know this may seem sudden or improper, but today, when I thought I might lose this place, lose you, I realized I couldn't bear either possibility." "What are you saying?" Ellie whispered, though her heart already knew the answer. "I'm saying that I've fallen in love with you, Eleanor Wilson. Not with your appearance, which I cannot see, but with your courage, your intelligence, your kindness." His fingers tightened around hers. "I'm saying that I want you to stay at Whispering Pine, not as my employee, but as my partner, my wife. If you could ever consider such a thing." Tears welled in Ellie's eyes, spilling onto her cheeks. She had come to Montana Territory seeking marriage with a stranger who had rejected her for being too old, too plain. And now another man, a man who had never seen her face, was offering her everything she'd ever wanted, not despite her age and plainness, but because of the person those years had shaped her into. "I don't have much to offer," Gabe continued, in the face of her silence. "A struggling ranch, a blind husband, it's not the comfortable life Mason could have given you." "Mason couldn't have given me anything of value," Ellie replied, finding her voice at last. "Not respect, not partnership, certainly not love." She rose from her chair, moving around the table to kneel beside him, taking both his hands in hers. "But you've given me all three, freely and without condition. Is that a yes?" Hope transformed his face, making him suddenly younger, almost boyish. "It's the easiest yes I've ever given," Ellie confirmed, her voice breaking with emotion. "I love you, Gabriel Sullivan. I would be honored to be your wife." His hands released hers, only to find her face, cradling it gently as his thumbs brushed away her tears. Then he leaned forward, his lips finding hers with surprising accuracy. For a blind man, the kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise sealed. When they parted, both were smiling, the simple joy of acceptance and belonging overwhelming after so much uncertainty. "What will people say?" Ellie wondered aloud. "The plain, aging school teacher and the blind rancher? They'll say we saw, What truly matters, Gabe replied, the play on words intentional. And perhaps they'll learn something about looking beyond appearances. Later that night, after Gabe had retired to his room upstairs, Ellie sat alone by the fire, her fingers absently touching her lips where the memory of his kiss still lingered. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, a sound she had come to love during her weeks at the ranch. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the disappointment of Frederick Mason's rejection, the humiliation of being deemed too old and plain to be worthy of love. How strange that what had seemed a devastating ending had actually been the beginning of something far more valuable. In just under 3 weeks, her life had transformed completely. She had discovered courage she hadn't known she possessed, formed connections in this new community, found purpose in protecting Whispering Pine. And most miraculous of all, she had found a man who truly saw her, not her aging face or graying hair, but the essential Ellie beneath the surface. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks upward. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Mason and Blackwood would not accept defeat easily. The fight for Whispering Pine was far from over. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath of love declared and accepted, Ellie Wilson, soon to be Ellie Sullivan, felt a certainty she had never known before. Whatever came next, they would face it together, their different strengths combining to create something neither could have achieved alone. She banked the fire for the night and climbed the stairs, pausing. Outside Gabe's closed door, so much had changed in a single day. Tomorrow would be the first day of their new understanding, the beginning of planning a shared future. "Good night," she whispered to the silent house, to the man sleeping beyond the door, to the ranch that had become her home. Outside, the pines continued their gentle whispered response, welcoming her at last to where she truly belonged. The morning after their declarations brought sunshine streaming through the kitchen windows and a lightness to Ellie's step, despite the uncertain future they faced. She hummed as she prepared breakfast, a simple tune from her childhood that she hadn't thought of in years. When Gabe appeared in the doorway, Scout at his heels, he paused to listen, a smile spreading across his face. "I've never heard you sing before." "I'm not singing," Ellie protested mildly, "just humming." "It's beautiful." He crossed to her, his movements confident in the familiar space. Without hesitation, he found her waist, drawing her gently to him. "Good morning." "Good morning," she replied, allowing herself to lean into his embrace, still marveling at how natural it felt. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Knowing you'll be here tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after." The simple domesticity of the moment, coffee brewing on the stove, sunlight warming the kitchen, the man she loved beside her, filled Ellie with contentment she had never expected to find. For a brief moment, she could almost forget the challenges that still lay ahead. But reality intruded shortly after breakfast in the form of a rider approaching from town. Ellie recognized Tommy's younger brother, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Miss Wilson, Mr. Sullivan," the boy called, barely waiting for his mount to stop before jumping down. "Martha sent me. There's trouble in town." "What kind of trouble, Billy?" Gabe asked, emerging onto the porch. "Mason's men are at the bank. They've called in loans on 3 ranches already this morning." Billy's face was flushed with the importance of his message. "And Mr. Blackwood's posted notices that anyone who stood against the dam project yesterday is banned from doing business with the Silver Creek Bank." Ellie and Gabe exchanged concerned glances. "It's starting," she said quietly. "The reprisals we expected." Gabe nodded grimly. "Billy, tell Martha we received her message. What about the hearing? Any word on when it will be held?" Senator Wallace sent a telegram from Helena. "The Territorial Land Commission will hear the case next Monday." Billy shifted from foot to foot. "There's more," Masons brought in hired guns from Butte. 6 of them arrived on the morning train. This news was more alarming. Hired gunmen meant Mason was preparing for resistance beyond legal channels. The stakes had just risen dramatically. "Thank you, Billy," Ellie said, pressing a freshly baked biscuit into the boy's hand. "Ride safely back to town." After the boy had galloped away, Gabe began pacing the porch, his usual calm demeanor disturbed. "We need to warn the others. If Mason's calling in loans, some of our supporters will be in immediate financial danger. Could Senator Wallace help? Surely there are laws against such blatant retaliation." "Laws require enforcement," Gabe replied, "and enforcement requires officials willing to stand against Mason's influence." He paused in his pacing. "But you're right. Wallace should be informed. I'll send Tommy to Helena with a letter this afternoon." The next few days passed in tense preparation. Riders came and went from Whispering Pine, carrying messages between the Allied ranches. Ellie wrote letters for Gabe to sign, documenting the pattern of harassment and financial pressure being applied to those who had opposed the dam project. On Thursday, Joseph arrived with news that chilled them both. "Mason's men cut Taylor's fences last night," he reported, accepting the coffee Ellie offered. "Let his entire herd scatter. He's still out trying to round them up, but he's lost at least 20 head over the ridge into Mason's property. And let me guess," Gabe said bitterly, "Mason's claiming any cattle on his land are his property now." "Exactly," Joseph confirmed. "Sheriff won't intervene. Says it's a civil matter." This pattern continued throughout the week. Broken fences, scattered livestock, mysterious fires in outlying barns. Mason was sending a clear message to anyone who opposed him. Stand down or suffer the consequences. Through it all, Ellie and Gabe worked side by side, their newly acknowledged love giving them strength to face each new challenge. In the evenings, they began planning their wedding, a simple ceremony to be held after. The hearing, regardless of its outcome. "I don't care if we lose every acre," Gabe told her one night as they sat before the fire. "As long as I have you, I can rebuild anywhere." By Saturday, 3 days before the hearing, tension in the valley had reached a breaking point. 2 more. Ranchers had capitulated to Mason's pressure, withdrawing their support for the opposition. Those who remained steadfast gathered at Whispering Pine to consolidate their strategy. "We need to stay united," Senator Wallace urged the assembled group. "Mason's counting on fear to dissolve our coalition before Monday's hearing." "Easy for you to say," Wilson Taylor replied bitterly. "You're not watching years of hard work, destroyed before your eyes." "I understand your frustration," the senator acknowledged, "but if we fracture now, Mason wins everything, not just this battle, but control of the entire valley for generations to come." The discussion continued. Late into the evening, tempers occasionally flaring as exhaustion and fear took their toll. Throughout it all, Ellie moved quietly among the men, offering coffee and calm words of encouragement, her school teacher's patience helping to smooth ruffled feathers and refocus attention on their common goal. When the meeting finally concluded, near midnight, the coalition had dwindled but still stood firm. 6 ranchers plus Senator Wallace committed to presenting a united front at Monday's hearing. "We'll leave for Helena at first light tomorrow," Wallace announced. "Traveling together provides safety, and it ensures we all arrive in time to prepare our testimonies." After the others had departed, Gabe and Ellie stood on the porch under a canopy of stars, the night air crisp with the promise of winter. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Yes," she admitted honestly, "but not enough to turn back." He smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That's my Ellie. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about moving forward despite it." They spent the remainder of the night preparing for the journey to Helena, packing clothes, organizing documents, ensuring the ranch would be secure during their absence. Tommy would stay behind with Scout to watch over things, though both Ellie and Gabe harbored private fears about what might happen to Whispering Pine while they were gone. Dawn was just breaking when the sound of approaching riders reached them. Expecting Senator Wallace and the others, Ellie opened the door with a welcoming smile that quickly faded. Instead of their allies, Frederick Mason himself sat astride, his horse in their yard, flanked by Silas Blackwood and 4 hard-faced men she didn't recognize. "Sullivan!" Mason called imperiously. "I think it's time we had a private conversation." Gabe emerged onto the porch, his stance wary but dignified. "We have nothing to discuss, Mason. Any communication can happen at the hearing on Monday." "That's where you're wrong." Mason dismounted, approaching the porch with a confidence that set Ellie's nerves on edge. "I'm offering you one last opportunity to be reasonable before things get unpleasant. More unpleasant than cutting. Fences and stealing cattle?" Ellie couldn't help retorting. Mason's gaze flicked to her with annoyed dismissal before returning to Gabe. "I'm willing to be generous, Sullivan. $10,000 for Whispering Pine, twice its market value. You and your companion can start fresh somewhere else. Perhaps back east, where people might be more accepting of your unusual arrangement." The insinuation made Ellie's cheeks burn, but Gabe remained unruffled. "My arrangement, as you call it, is a forthcoming marriage to the finest woman I've ever known," he replied evenly. "And Whispering Pine isn't for sale at any price." Mason's pleasant facade slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You're a fool, Sullivan. Your little coalition is falling apart. The hearing is a formality. I've already secured the votes on the commission." "Then why are you here?" Gabe challenged. "If victory is assured, why offer to buy what you claim will soon be yours anyway?" It was a shrewd question that momentarily caught Mason off guard. Blackwood stepped forward, his patience clearly exhausted. "Enough games. The truth is, Sullivan, we're here to ensure you never reach Helena." His hand moved meaningfully toward his holstered pistol. "Accidents happen on mountain roads, especially to blind men and aging spinsters who've been poking their noses where they don't belong." Ellie felt her blood run cold at the naked threat. These men hadn't come to negotiate. They'd come to eliminate obstacles permanently. "That would be murder," she said, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. "That would be frontier justice," Blackwood corrected with a cruel smile. "No witnesses, no crime." The tension was broken by the distant sound of multiple riders, approaching fast, Senator Wallace and the remaining coalition members arriving as planned. Mason's expression darkened as he recognized the approaching company. "This isn't over," he warned, backing toward his horse. "Nobody crosses Frederick Mason and prospers in this territory." Ellie and Gabe watched in silent relief as Mason and his men rode away, passing the arriving coalition with nothing more than dark glares and muttered curses. "What was that about?" Senator Wallace demanded as he dismounted in the yard. "Just Mason making one last attempt at intimidation," Gabe replied, deliberately downplaying the encounter. There was no need to worry their allies with the true nature of the threat. Within the hour, their party was on the road to Helena. 8 riders moving at a steady pace through the morning mist. Ellie rode beside Gabe, marveling once again at his ability to navigate on horseback despite his blindness. His stallion, Thunder, had been his companion since before the mining accident, and the two moved as one across the familiar terrain. The journey to the territorial capital would take most of the day, following the winding road through mountain passes and river valleys. Senator Wallace set a careful pace, mindful of the potential for ambush in the more isolated stretches. By mid-afternoon, they had reached Elk Pass, the highest point on their journey and the most vulnerable. Sheer cliffs rose on one side, while a steep ravine dropped away on the other, leaving the narrow road exposed and with few options for cover. "We should rest the horses before continuing," Wallace suggested, guiding them to a small clearing just off the road. "We're making good time." As they dismounted, Ellie noticed Gabe tilt his head, listening intently to something beyond her hearing. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "Not sure," he replied, his expression concerned. "The birds have gone silent." Before she could respond, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the pass. One of the ranchers cried out, clutching his arm as he fell from his horse. "Ambush!" Senator Wallace shouted, drawing his pistol. "Take cover!" Chaos erupted as more shots rang out from the rocks above. Mason's hired guns had gotten ahead of them, positioning themselves for a deadly attack. The coalition members scattered, seeking whatever meager shelter the terrain offered. Ellie grabbed Gabe's arm, pulling him behind a large boulder as bullets chipped stone around them. "We're pinned down," she gasped, trying to keep her voice calm for his sake. "How many?" he asked, his face set with grim determination. "I can see 3 shooters on the ridge," she reported, risking a quick glance around their cover. "Maybe more hidden." Another rancher fell, his leg shattered by a well-aimed shot. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, outnumbered and outpositioned. Their group faced grim odds. In that desperate moment, an unexpected sound reached them, the thunder of approaching hooves, not from the direction of Silver Creek, but from the Helena side of the pass. More riders were coming fast. "Mason's reinforcements?" Ellie wondered aloud, her heart sinking. But the new arrivals proved to be something else entirely. A dozen mounted men in uniform crested the rise, rifles at the ready. Territorial marshals led by none other than Howard Keene, the land office representative who had attempted to serve the eminent domain papers days earlier. United States. "Marshals!" Keene's voice boomed across the pass. "Throw down your weapons!" The shooting from the ridge faltered, then ceased as Mason's gunmen realized they were now outnumbered and facing federal authority. Within minutes, the marshals had secured the pass and begun apprehending the ambushers. Senator Wallace approached Keene, his expression a mixture of relief and confusion. "Your timing is impeccable, Howard. But how did you know?" Keene dismounted, adjusting his spectacles with a slight smile. "A telegram arrived from the governor yesterday, ordering an investigation into the Silver Creek Development Company based on evidence of fraud and corruption. When we learned you were traveling to Helena with key witnesses." He shrugged. It seemed prudent to provide an escort. Ellie helped Gabe negotiate the rocky terrain toward the assembled officials, her arms steady around his waist. "The governor intervened?" Gabe asked, his surprise evident. "With encouragement from the Territorial Supreme Court," Keene confirmed. "It seems your evidence made quite an impression, Miss Wilson, particularly when coupled with similar complaints from 3 other counties where Mason and his investors have attempted similar water rights schemes. The revelation that their local struggle was part of a larger pattern brought both vindication and relief. The wounded ranchers were tended to by the marshal's field medic, their injuries serious, but not life-threatening. "What happens now?" Ellie asked, as they prepared to continue toward Helena, now under marshal protection. "The hearing will proceed as scheduled," Keene explained. "But with a significant difference. Frederick Mason and Silas Blackwood are being detained in Helena for questioning regarding multiple allegations of fraud, coercion, and now attempted murder." The journey resumed with renewed hope, their small party now part of a larger procession of justice. As they rode side by side, Gabe reached across the space between their horses, finding Ellie's hand with unerring accuracy. "We may actually win this," he said, wonder in his voice. "We already have," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Whatever happens with Whispering Pine, we found each other. That's the victory that matters most." The hearing on Monday proceeded with a formality that belied the drama preceding it. With Mason and Blackwood in custody and the governor's office directly involved, the eminent domain proceedings were not merely suspended, but cancelled outright. The water rights of Whispering Pine and the other small ranches were confirmed, and protected by new territorial regulations against precisely the kind of scheme Mason had attempted. 2 weeks later, under the Whispering Pines that gave the ranch its name, Eleanor Wilson became Eleanor Sullivan in a simple ceremony attended by the friends who had stood with them through their ordeal. Martha Hayes wept openly, declaring it the happiest day Silver Creek had seen in years. Senator Wallace gave the bride away, and even Tommy managed to keep Scout clean for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Gabe's hands gently held Ellie's, his unseeing eyes somehow finding hers as if drawn by the magnetic pull of her presence. "I promise to see you," he said softly, words audible only to her. "Not as the world sees, with eyes that judge surfaces, but with a heart that knows your true worth." Ellie's voice trembled with emotion as she responded, "And I promise to be your eyes when you need them, your strength when you falter, and your equal partner in all things, all days of our lives." Their kiss sealed promises that had been forming since that rainy evening when a rejected mail-order bride and a blind rancher found in each other what others had failed to see, the perfect vision of love that looks not with the eyes, but with the heart. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.